The graduation ceremony had already begun when Ben Walker arrived, his worn green military jacket drawing stares from parents in designer suits. Security guards moved to intercept him at the gate, their hands raised in practiced authority. "Sir, the ceremony's full. No late entries." Ben nodded, understanding their job, and quietly showed his invitation. The guard squinted at the crumpled paper, then at Ben's weathered face, clearly doubting this man belonged among Whitmore Academy's elite families. "You'll need to sit in the back," the guard finally said. Ben Walker, former Navy SEAL commander, simply replied, "That's fine." As he walked toward the last row, no one knew that 6 of America's most decorated warriors were already on their way. The morning sun cast long shadows across Whitmore Academy's manicured courtyard, where 400 chairs sat arranged in perfect symmetry, white fabric fluttering in the June breeze. Parents had arrived early, claiming prime spots with designer handbags and folded programs, their conversations a symphony of stock portfolios and summer homes in the Hamptons. The stage gleamed with fresh polish, adorned with arrangements of white roses and blue hydrangeas that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Behind the podium, a row of mahogany chairs awaited the distinguished guests, board members, donors whose names graced buildings, the mayor's representative. Everything about this space whispered exclusivity, tradition, power accumulated across generations. Ben Walker had parked his 15-year-old pickup truck 3 blocks away, not wanting its rust and primer patches to stand out among the Mercedes and Teslas. He'd worn his best clothes, khaki pants pressed with military precision, a white shirt he'd ironed twice, and the jacket, always the jacket. The green fabric had faded over 20 years, its edges frayed, one button replaced with another that didn't quite match. But the SEAL trident on the chest pocket remained sharp, the patch, reading SEAL Team 11, Commander B. Walker, still intact, despite countless washings. He'd found the invitation on his apartment door 3 days ago, slipped under in an envelope with his son's handwriting. Inside, alongside the formal graduation announcement, Tyler had written a single line, "I know you'll be there, Dad. You always are." The letter had weight beyond its paper. Tyler had included his guardianship papers, signed when Ben had taken custody after his wife's death 18 years ago. The boy had been hours old, red-faced and screaming in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and grief. The doctors had given Ben options: adoption agencies, foster care, relatives who might be better suited. But Ben had looked at that tiny life, so fragile and fierce, and made the only choice a father could make. He'd left the SEALs 6 months later, trading night raids and classified missions for night feedings and diaper changes, trading brothers in arms for parent-teacher conferences where he sat alone, trading medals for minimum wage jobs that let him be home when Tyler got off school. Now, walking past rows of parents who pulled their purses closer as he passed, Ben kept his eyes forward. A woman in pearls whispered to her husband, "Security really should screen better. Look at that jacket." Her companion, a man whose Rolex caught the light with every gesture, responded just loudly enough to be heard, probably one of the custodial staff. They sometimes let them watch. Ben had heard worse in countries where bullets answered insults. He found a seat in the very last row, metal folding chairs that hadn't been covered in white fabric like the others. The view was partially blocked by a decorative arch of balloons, but he could see the stage. That was enough. 3 rows ahead, Walt Greer shifted in his seat. 71 years old, Vietnam veteran, Purple Heart recipient. He'd learned to read men the way others read books. Something about the newcomer's walk, controlled, balanced, weight distributed for instant movement, sparked recognition. Walt had seen that walk before, in men who'd been trained to move through darkness and emerge victorious. He turned slightly, catching a glimpse of the patch. His breath caught. SEAL Team 11. He knew that unit. Everyone in special operations circles knew that unit. They'd been legends in Afghanistan, their commander known for bringing every man home alive through 7 deployments. Walt squinted, trying to match the weathered face with memories of newspaper photos from a decade ago. Could it really be him? The ceremony proceeded with practiced precision. Principal Dana Wilcox, immaculate in her Navy suit, welcomed the crowd with rehearsed warmth. The valedictorian would speak third, after the salutatorian and class president. Tyler Walker's name appeared in the program, with a small asterisk: full scholarship to MIT, highest GPA in Whitmore Academy's 70-year history, National Merit Scholar. The accomplishment seemed at odds with the man in the back row, yet Tyler had listed his father as his sole guardian on every form, every emergency contact, every proud moment documented in the school's records. A camera crew from the local news station began setting up, their equipment blocking several sightlines. The producer, a young woman with a clipboard and headset, scanned the crowd for optimal angles. She noticed Ben immediately. His jacket stood out like camouflage in a ballroom. "Excuse me, sir," she said, approaching with professional firmness. "We need this area clear for the camera track." "You'll need to move." Ben stood without argument, gathering himself to shift further back, though there were no more rows. Perhaps you could stand by the fence? She suggested, pointing to the periphery where maintenance staff sometimes watched events. Ben nodded, moving to the indicated spot. He'd stood watch in worse places. Dan Shepard, a father of 3 seated in the middle section, had observed the interaction. Something about the quiet dignity of the man's compliance struck him. As Ben passed, Dan noticed the patch more clearly, saw the wear patterns on the jacket that spoke of constant use rather than neglect. On impulse, Dan stood and extended his hand. Dan Shepard. My daughter's graduating today. Ben accepted the handshake, his grip firm but not aggressive. Ben Walker. Same here. Son. Dan's eyes widened slightly at the name. Walker. The valedictorian was Tyler Walker. This man, relegated to the fence, was the father of their class's brightest star. Would you like my seat? Dan offered quietly. Ben shook his head. I'm good where I am. Just want to see him walk. Dan returned to his seat, but something had shifted in his perception. He began watching not just the stage, but the man by the fence. The first 2 speakers delivered their prepared remarks, celebrations of achievement, thanks to parents and teachers, jokes about senior pranks that drew polite laughter. Tyler Walker rose for his turn, and Ben straightened against the fence. His son looked older than 18, shoulders broad from swimming, posture straight as a marble column. Tyler approached the podium, set down his prepared cards, and then did something unexpected. He pushed them aside. His eyes swept the crowd, searching, until they found the figure by the fence. For a moment, father and son held each other's gaze across the distance. Then Tyler began to speak. I had a speech prepared about the future, about dreams and ambitions, about the doors that education opens. But standing here, I realize there's something more important I need to say. It's about the doors that close so others can open. It's about sacrifice that goes unnoticed and love that never announces itself. Tyler's voice carried clear and strong, trained by years of debate team, but now trembling with emotion. My father is here today. He's standing by the fence because he arrived late, because he didn't want to make a fuss, because that's who he is. He stands at the edges so I can stand at the center. Heads began to turn, seeking the subject of Tyler's words. Ben remained still, his jaw tight, eyes locked on his son. Tyler continued. 18 years ago, my father was Commander Benjamin Walker, SEAL Team 11. He'd led 68 combat missions, earned 2 Silver Stars, 3 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart he never talks about. He had a career that admirals envied, and a future that promised stars on his shoulders. Then my mother died giving birth to me, and he had a choice. The Navy offered him another deployment, another chance at glory. Instead, he took off his trident and picked up a baby bottle. The crowd had gone silent now, even the young children sensing the weight of the moment. Principal Wilcox gripped her program, watching her carefully orchestrated ceremony veer off script. Tyler's voice grew stronger. My father has worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat: warehouse shifts, security details, anything that paid. He wore the same jacket to every school event, the one he's wearing now, because he spent his clothing money on my textbooks. Some of you have whispered about that jacket today, called it worn, called it inappropriate. That jacket has been to places where America's freedom was defended in darkness. That jacket has caught the tears of dying brothers and the rain of foreign storms. It isn't worn, it's seasoned. Marissa Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Holdings, and the Academy's most influential board member, watched from her place of honor on the stage. She prided herself on control, on image, on the careful cultivation of success. This deviation from protocol irritated her. Graduation was about collective achievement, not individual stories. She made a note to speak with Principal Wilcox about screening speeches more carefully. Yet something nagged at her. The name Benjamin Walker felt familiar, like an echo from a distant conversation. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on when would be appropriate to intervene. I stand here as valedictorian, not because I'm the smartest, Tyler continued, but because I had a father who sat with me through every homework struggle, who checked my math even when he'd been up since 4 a.m., who told me that excellence wasn't about being better than others but about being better than yourself were yesterday. He never missed a parent-teacher conference, even when it meant losing a day's wages. He never missed a science fair, even when he had to stand in the back because single fathers in worn jackets don't get seats in the front row. Walt Greer was already pulling out his phone, typing quickly into a veterans group chat. Benjamin Walker is at Whitmore Academy. The Benjamin Walker. Someone needs to know. The responses came instantly: disbelief, then recognition, then action. 6 men in different parts of the state read the message and began to move. They'd been gathering for a reunion 40 minutes away, old warriors telling older stories. Now they had a mission. Tyler reached into his graduation gown and pulled out a small pin, his valedictorian medal, gold and gleaming. "This belongs to my father. Every late night he stayed up with me. Every sacrifice he made without complaint. Every time he chose my future over his comfort. This is his achievement. Dad, I know you won't come up here. I know you'll say this is my day. But I need everyone to know that you don't just wear that jacket. You've earned it every single day since you chose me over everything else." Ben's eyes burned, but his training held. SEALs don't cry in public. They endure. They persist. They watch their sons become men, and feel their hearts break with pride in private. But his throat had closed, and his hands, steady enough to defuse bombs, trembled against the fence. Principal Wilcox stood, sensing the moment demanded management. She approached the podium, gently placing a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Thank you for that moving tribute, Mr. Walker. Now, perhaps we can return to Tyler." Stepped back, but didn't sit down. Instead, he faced his father and did something that stopped every heart in attendance. He saluted. Not the casual gesture of a teenager, but a crisp, military salute, learned from watching his father teach it to other veterans' children, practiced in mirrors when he thought no one was looking. Ben's hand rose automatically, returning the salute with precision that 2 decades couldn't erase. The crowd watched this silent exchange, and something shifted in the atmosphere. Dan Shepard stood first, followed by his wife, then Walt Greer, using his cane for support. One by one, people rose from their seats not in applause, which would come later, but in something older, more primal, respect for something they didn't fully understand, but recognized as profound. It was then that the whispers truly began. Walt Greer, unable to contain himself, leaned to the man beside him. "That's Benjamin Walker, SEAL Team 11, the Phantom Commander." The name rippled outward like water disturbed by a stone. The Phantom Commander? The one from the documentary? The one who saved those Marines? 32 operations without a single KIA? The whispers grew, gained substance, became a current of recognition flowing through the crowd. Marissa Whitmore heard the words from her position on stage, and the memory finally surfaced. Her younger brother, Daniel, had been a private in the Marines, part of a unit pinned down in Kandahar province. The official report had been sanitized, but Daniel had told her the truth during one of his rare moments of vulnerability. A SEAL team had come through hellfire to extract them, their commander personally carrying 2 wounded Marines to safety while under heavy fire. Daniel had said the commander's name once. Walker. Benjamin Walker. Her brother had lived because of the man now standing by the fence like an intruder at his own son's graduation. She rose from her mahogany chair, her movement drawing attention. Principal Wilcox looked relieved, assuming Marissa would restore order. Instead, Marissa descended the stage steps with unusual purpose. The crowd parted as she walked, they always did for money and power. She approached Ben directly, and for a moment, they stood facing each other, the CEO in her tailored suit, and the warrior in his faded jacket. "Mr. Walker," she said, loud enough for others to hear, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. You should be seated with the honored guests." She gestured toward the stage, toward the mahogany chairs reserved for dignitaries. Ben shook his head slightly. "I'm fine here, ma'am. I came to see my son, not to be seen." The response struck Marissa with unexpected force. When had she last done anything without considering how it would be seen? She managed perceptions like chess pieces, crafted images like weapons. This man had commanded some of America's most elite warriors, and now stood content by a fence. "Your son said you're the reason he's valedictorian," she pressed. "Surely that earns you a better view." "I can see him from here," Ben replied simply. "That's all I need." Before Marissa could respond, a sound cut through the morning air, footsteps in perfect synchronization, measured and deliberate. The crowd turned toward the entrance, where 6 men in black suits walked in formation. They moved with the controlled grace of predators, their presence immediately commanding attention. One had a slight limp he refused to favor. Another bore a scar across his jaw that his beard couldn't quite hide. The man in front had steel-gray hair streaked with premature white dark sunglasses that reflected nothing, and hands that had stories written in every callus. They walked through the center aisle without asking permission, without acknowledging the stares. Parents pulled children closer, instinctively recognizing something dangerous made temporarily safe. The formation was perfect, 2 columns of 3, spacing exact to the inch. They'd practiced this movement in places where precision meant survival, and muscle memory didn't forget. Principal Wilcox moved to intercept them. "Gentlemen, I'm sorry, but this is a private ceremony." The lead man removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes the color of winter oceans. "Ma'am, we're here for our commander." His voice carried the authority of someone who'd given orders in situations where failure meant death. "We heard he was being asked to stand by the fence." The principal's prepared response died in her throat. These men radiated a controlled violence that made her security guards look like children playing dress-up. The lead man's gaze swept past her, found Ben, and something passed between them, a conversation in microseconds that civilians couldn't read. Ben straightened, an involuntary response to the presence of his brothers. The 6 men altered their formation, creating a corridor. The lead man reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded piece of cloth, deep navy blue with gold trim. He unfolded it with reverence, revealing the seal trident embroidered in the center, surrounded by 6 stars, one for each deployment they'd survived together. Below the trident, stitched in gold thread, Team 11, Forever Brothers. They walked toward Ben with the cloth held between them like a battle standard. The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the children seemed to understand they were witnessing something sacred. When they reached Ben, they stopped in perfect unison. The leader spoke, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Commander Walker, your brothers remember. Your sacrifice was not unnoticed. Your honor was not forgotten." Ben's composure, held so carefully, cracked slightly. "Jake," he said to the leader, "you didn't need to." "Yes, sir, we did." Jake's voice broke military protocol with emotion. "We've carried this for 7 years, waiting for the right moment. Your son's achievement seems like that moment." He turned to Tyler, who had descended from the stage and stood frozen, watching fathers he'd never met honor his father he'd loved alone. "Tyler Walker, your father led us through 17 operations in Afghanistan. He brought every man home alive. When the politicians wanted us to take unacceptable risks, he stood between us and them. When we were wounded, he carried us. When we were broken, he held us together." The man with the scar stepped forward. "Martinez, sir. You remember Kandahar, the school extraction. You took shrapnel meant for me." He pulled up his sleeve, revealing a tattoo coordinates and a date. "I got this so I'd never forget. My kids exist because you bled that day." The one with the limp spoke next. "Thompson, sir. My leg got torn up in that IED outside Bagram. You carried me 4 miles to the extraction point. Doctors said if you'd been 5 minutes later, I'd have lost it. I danced with my daughter at her wedding last year because of those 4 miles." Each man had a story, a moment when Benjamin Walker had chosen their lives over his glory, their safety over his advancement. They spoke them simply, without embellishment, because truth needed no decoration. The crowd listened to tales of heroism that sounded like mythology, but carried the unmistakable weight of fact. When they finished, Jake held out the cloth to Tyler. "This belongs to you now. Your father gave up his teams for you, but you should know what he gave up. You should know who he was before he became who you needed." Tyler accepted the cloth with shaking hands, then did something that surprised everyone, including Ben. He walked to the stage, to the trophy case where Whitmore Academy displayed its achievements, debate championships, science fair victories, academic distinctions. He opened the unlocked case and placed the seal cloth inside, arranging it carefully among the trophies. Then he turned to the crowd. "This belongs here," Tyler said, his voice steady now. "Because this school talks about excellence, about achievement, about legacy. My father's legacy isn't in medals or missions. It's in choosing love over glory. But his brother's cloth will remind us that sometimes the greatest achievements are the ones nobody sees." Principal Wilcox found herself nodding, though she hadn't meant to. The ceremony had completely escaped her control, but something more important was happening. She thought of her own father, a quiet man who'd worked double shifts at a factory to pay for her education, who'd worn the same suit to every school event until it fell apart. When had she started valuing appearance over substance? The SEALs turned their formation toward Ben again. As one, they saluted. Not the casual gesture of veterans at a parade, but the sharp, precise salute of active warriors recognizing their commander. Ben's return salute was automatic, muscle memory overriding emotion. Then Jake broke protocol entirely. He stepped forward and embraced Ben, a collision of brothers separated by time but not distance. The others followed, and for a moment, 7 warriors stood in a huddle while hundreds watched. When they separated, Jake addressed the crowd. "We're interrupting your ceremony, and we apologize. But we've waited 7 years to honor this man publicly. Benjamin Walker disappeared from our community because he chose to be a father over a legend. We've come to tell him, and all of you, that choosing love doesn't diminish honor, it defines it." Marissa Whitmore found her voice. "Mr. Walker saved my brother's life. Private Daniel Whitmore, Marines, Kandahar Province, March 2010. The admission cost her vulnerability wasn't in her vocabulary. I've built an empire on strategic decisions and calculated risks. But I've never made a choice as brave as giving up everything for someone else's future." She turned to Principal Wilcox. "I'm establishing a new scholarship, full ride, all expenses, for children of veterans who choose sacrifice over recognition. It will be called the Benjamin Walker Scholarship, for silent service. She paused, then added, "The first recipient should be retroactive. Tyler Walker's full MIT scholarship should come from this fund, so his father knows that his sacrifice is seen, valued, and honored." Ben finally spoke, his voice rough with contained emotion. "This wasn't necessary, any of it. I came to watch my son graduate, that's all." "Exactly," Jake responded. "That's exactly why it was necessary." The 6 SEALs moved to the back row, taking seats around Ben without asking if they were taken. Parents relocated without complaint. Something about these men suggested argument would be unwise and unnecessary. They sat like a protection detail, creating a pocket of military bearing in the sea of civilians. Principal Wilcox returned to the podium, trying to salvage some structure from the ceremony. "Perhaps we should continue with the diploma presentation." "Wait." Tyler spoke from the stage. "Dad, you need to say something." Ben shook his head immediately. "This is your day." "No." Tyler's voice carried new authority. "It's our day. You've stood in the shadows for 18 years. Please, just once, stand in the light." The SEALs stood as one, creating an honor corridor. Jake spoke quietly but firmly. "Commander, your son is giving you an order." Ben rose slowly, his movement drawing every eye. He walked through the corridor of his brothers, each step measured but reluctant. When he reached the podium, he stood for a long moment, looking at the sea of faces. These weren't his people. These were wealth and privilege, careful breeding and inherited advantage. But his son was among them, had earned his place among them through merit alone. "I'm not comfortable with speeches," Ben began, his voice quiet enough that people leaned forward. "I'm trained for action, not words. But my son asked, and I've never refused him anything I could give." He paused, gathering thoughts like ammunition. "People talk about sacrifice like it's loss. It's not. It's investment. I didn't lose my military career. I invested it in my son. Every promotion I didn't get became an hour helping with homework. Every medal I didn't earn became a school play I didn't miss." He found Tyler's eyes in the crowd. "You've thanked me publicly for choosing you. But you need to understand it wasn't a choice. The moment they put you in my arms, everything else became secondary. Not because I'm heroic, but because that's what love does. It reorganizes your priorities so completely that what looks like sacrifice to others feels like privilege to you." His voice gained strength. "To the parents here, wondering if your careers, your ambitions, your dreams are worth pursuing at the expense of time with your children, they're not. I've led men through firefights, earned commendations from generals, had my story told in classified files that will never see daylight. None of it compares to watching my son become the man standing before you." He turned to the faculty. "You've educated him, and I'm grateful. But remember that some of your students have parents who won't be in the front row, who can't donate buildings, who show up in old jackets because that's what they have. Don't mistake their appearance for their worth. Don't mistake their silence for absence of pride." Finally, he addressed the graduates. "You're entering a world that will judge you by metrics, salary, titles, acquisitions, but life judges you by different standards. Did you show up when showing up was hard? Did you choose love when choosing ambition was easier? Did you stand for others when standing alone was safer? Your education has given you tools. Your character will determine how you use them." Ben stepped back from the podium, ready to return to obscurity, but Tyler met him halfway. In his hands was his valedictorian medal, removed from his gown. "This is yours," Tyler said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Every A on my transcript is yours. Every test I passed, every essay I wrote, every late night I studied, you were there. You don't get to hide anymore, Dad. You don't get to pretend you're just watching. You're the reason I'm standing here." Ben tried to refuse, but Tyler's hands were insistent, pinning the medal to his father's jacket, right below the seal patch. The gold looked incongruous against the faded green, but somehow perfect past and present, sacrifice and reward, joined in metal and cloth. The applause started with Dan Shepard, who understood fathers who stood in shadows. It spread to Walt Greer, who recognized warriors who chose harder battles. It reached the SEALs, who broke protocol to stand and clap for their commander's greatest mission. Finally, impossibly, it reached Marissa Whitmore, whose corporate hands had never applauded anything that didn't profit her until now. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. Ben stood frozen, uncomfortable with recognition, trained for shadows but caught in spotlight. Tyler stood beside him, shoulders touching, and Ben realized this was what victory actually looked like. Not flags and medals, but standing beside the person you'd shaped through presence and persistence. When the applause finally died, Principal Wilcox made an executive decision. "Mr. Walker, would you present your son with his diploma?" The break in protocol should have scandalized the traditional audience, but something had shifted in the courtyard's atmosphere. The careful boundaries between those who belonged and those who were tolerated had blurred. Ben accepted the diploma from the principal, holding it like something precious and fragile. He turned to Tyler, and for a moment, they weren't at a public ceremony but back in their small apartment, father checking homework, son asking questions about honor and duty and love. "I'm proud of you," Ben said simply, handing over the diploma. "Not for this paper, not for the grades, not for MIT. I'm proud of who you are when no one's watching. I'm proud that you stood up today when staying silent would have been easier. I'm proud that you understand love isn't expressed in words but in presence." Tyler accepted the diploma but didn't move away. Instead, he whispered something only his father could hear. "Mom would have loved you for this. For all of it." Ben's composure finally broke. One tear, just one, escaped his control. Tyler saw it, marked it, treasured it as the rarest of gifts from a man who'd been trained to show nothing. The ceremony continued, but its character had changed. Each name called carried new weight, each family's pride examined through a different lens. Parents who'd complained about parking now wondered about the stories they didn't know. Students who'd taken their advantages for granted considered what advantages actually meant. When the last diploma was presented, when the traditional cap toss had settled, the crowd began to disperse. But movement clustered around Ben and the SEALs, parents approaching with newfound respect, students asking questions about service and sacrifice. Ben answered quietly, deflecting attention whenever possible, but his brothers were less reticent. They told stories of their commander, not classified operations, but human moments. The time he gave his last MRE to a hungry child in a war zone. The night he stayed up with a wounded enemy combatant, providing medical care despite protocol suggesting otherwise. The way he memorized every man's family details so he could ask about sick mothers and newborn children. Marissa Whitmore waited until the crowd thinned, then approached with uncharacteristic humility. "Mr. Walker, I need to tell you something about Daniel, my brother. He never forgot what you did. He has PTSD, struggles with civilian life, but he talks about you. Says you showed him that strength isn't about being unbreakable but about choosing what's worth breaking for." Ben's response was quiet. "Your brother was 19, scared, and 3,000 miles from home. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Marissa said firmly. "They wouldn't have. I've spent my career surrounded by people who calculate cost-benefit in every interaction. You calculated nothing, you just acted. That's something I need to learn." She handed him a business card. "I meant what I said about the scholarship. But also, if you ever want to work somewhere that values what you actually are instead of how you appear, call me." Whitmore Holdings could use someone who understands that sometimes the right choice isn't the profitable one. Ben pocketed the card without looking at it. His employment wasn't the point of today, would never be the point of any day that involved Tyler's achievements. As the courtyard emptied, Principal Wilcox approached. "Mr. Walker, I owe you an apology. We talk about character education, about teaching values, about developing whole persons. But we sort people by appearance and bank accounts. Today, you taught everyone here, including me, a lesson we badly needed." She gestured to the trophy case where the seal cloth now held a place of honor. "That stays there permanently. And next year, we're instituting a new tradition. One chair, front row, center, will remain empty at every graduation. A reminder that someone, somewhere, is standing at the fence so someone else can stand at the podium." Ben nodded, accepting the gesture without fully embracing it. Recognition made him uncomfortable, always had. He'd operated in darkness for so long that light felt foreign. The SEALs prepared to leave, their presence needed elsewhere, their point made. Jake gripped Ben's shoulder. "We've got a reunion to get back to. You should come. Bring Tyler. Let him meet the men who became who they are because of who you were." "Maybe," Ben said, which both men knew meant no. He wasn't ready to rejoin that world, might never be ready. That life felt like a previous incarnation, connected to this one by thread but not fabric. One by one, the SEALs said goodbye, each handshake carrying the weight of brotherhood that time couldn't diminish. Thompson pressed something into Ben's hand, a challenge coin from their unit, worn smooth from years of carrying. "For Tyler," he said. So he knows his father's story isn't just words but metal and memory. When they'd gone, taking their dangerous grace with them, the courtyard felt emptier but somehow fuller. Their presence had changed the space, left an impression that wouldn't fade with the folding chairs and forgotten programs. Tyler stood with his friends, accepting congratulations, but his eyes tracked his father. Ben had returned to the fence, comfortable at margins, and Tyler excused himself to join him. They stood together, watching groundskeepers begin the cleanup, and Tyler said, "You could have told me about who you were, what you gave up." "Who I was isn't who I am," Ben replied. "I'm your father. That's the only identity that matters. But the stories are their stories, not mine." I was just present when they happened. Tyler studied his father's profile, seeing new angles and familiar features. Mom knew, didn't she? Who you were? For the first time that day, Ben smiled genuinely. Your mother knew exactly who I was. She saw through the uniform to the man underneath. She loved me not because I was a SEAL, but despite it. She knew that job came with costs she'd have to pay. His voice softened. She paid the highest one. Tell me about her. It was a request Tyler made rarely, knowing it carved fresh wounds and old scars. But today felt different, like barriers had fallen, and truths could breathe. She was brave, Ben said. Braver than me. I faced enemies with weapons. She faced death with grace. The doctors told her carrying you was dangerous, that her heart condition made pregnancy life-threatening. She could have terminated, saved herself. Instead, she chose you. Said any life worth creating was worth risking everything for. Ben's voice grew thick. Her last words were about you. Not goodbye to me, not fear about dying, but make sure he knows he was chosen. You were chosen, Tyler. By her to live, by me to raise, by yourself to succeed. Every choice led to this moment. Tyler absorbed this, adding new depth to his understanding of sacrifice. His mother had died for him to live. His father had lived for him to thrive. The weight of that love was almost unbearable, but he would bear it, transform it, pass it forward. I'm going to make it worth it, Tyler said. MIT, whatever comes after, I'll make your sacrifices worth it. Ben turned to face his son fully. You already have. Every morning you got up for school instead of giving up. Every time you chose studying over easier paths. Every moment you've been kind when being cruel would have been simpler. You've already justified every sacrifice, just by being who you are. They stood in comfortable silence, father and son, warrior and scholar, past and future. Around them, Whitmore Academy returned to its manicured perfection, but something had permanently shifted. The fence where Ben stood would be remembered. The trophy case would tell a story beyond competitions won. The empty chair would ask questions about who wasn't seen and why. As they prepared to leave, Tyler pulled out his phone. The guys want to meet you. My friends. They're pretty amazed that my dad is. Well, you. I'm just your dad. No. Tyler's interruption was firm. You don't get to minimize yourself anymore. You're a decorated Navy SEAL who gave up glory for love. You're a single father who never missed a school event. You're a man who stands at fences so others can stand at podiums. You're Benjamin Walker, and that name means something. To me, to your brothers, to everyone who heard you today. Ben considered this, then nodded slowly. Meeting Tyler's friends as himself, not hiding behind practiced invisibility, felt like another kind of courage. As they walked toward the parking lot, they passed under an old oak tree that had shaded generations of graduates. Tyler stopped, looked up at its branches, then at his father. This is where I decided to apply to MIT. Sitting here, thinking about you, about the choices you made. I wanted to build something that would make those choices worthwhile. You don't build worthwhile, Ben said. You become it. Tyler removed his valedictorian pin from his father's jacket, despite Ben's protest. This stays with you. I'll earn my own achievements. This one is yours. He repinned it more securely, making sure it would survive the ride home in the old pickup truck. The gold caught the filtered sunlight through oak leaves, sending small reflections dancing across Ben's weathered face. The SEALs, Tyler said suddenly. They came because of a text message, didn't they? Someone here recognized you, reached out to the community. Ben nodded. Walt Greer, Vietnam vet in the third row. He knows the weight of being forgotten. Made sure I wasn't. I want to meet him. Thank him. He doesn't need thanks. Warriors recognize warriors. It's what we do. They continued toward the truck, but Tyler had one more question. Would you do it again? Knowing everything, the struggle, the judgment, the standing at fences, would you make the same choice? Ben stopped, turned to face his son directly. Tyler, I would make that choice in every lifetime, in every universe, in every possible timeline. Raising you wasn't a sacrifice. It was the only mission that ever really mattered. A year later, Whitmore Academy's graduation proceeded under the same June Sunday. The chairs were arranged with the same precision, the stage decorated with the same expensive flowers. But in the front row, center position, sat an empty chair. Not vacant, but occupied by absence itself, draped with a green jacket that had become legend. Parents arriving early asked about it. Teachers explained the tradition born from the previous year, the chair for those who stand at fences, for love that doesn't announce itself, for sacrifice that wears old jackets and works night shifts. Some parents, particularly those who'd been present the year before, told the story of Benjamin Walker to newcomers, embellishing nothing because nothing needed embellishment. Principal Dana Wilcox had changed in subtle but significant ways. Her suits remained impeccable, but her speeches included maintenance staff by name. Her office, once a shrine to academic achievements, now displayed a photo from the previous graduation. Ben and Tyler Walker, father and son, standing together as equals. She'd learned that excellence came in forms that standardized tests couldn't measure. The Whitmore Walker Scholarship had funded 3 students in its first year, all children of veterans who'd chosen service over visibility. Their parents sat in prominent positions, no longer relegated to margins. One mother, a former Army medic who'd lost her leg in Iraq, wept openly when her daughter's name was called. She'd expected to watch from the parking lot, having arrived in a borrowed dress and mismatched shoes. Instead, she sat where everyone could see her sacrifice worn with pride. Tyler Walker attended the ceremony, taking a day from his freshman year at MIT. He'd already distinguished himself in engineering, but more importantly, he'd started a support group for students from military families. They met weekly, sharing stories of parents who stood watch in various ways, some in uniform, some in factory clothes, all in love. He sat beside the empty chair, his hand occasionally touching the jacket draped there. Ben had wanted to attend, but Tyler insisted on this arrangement. "Let them see what absence looks like," he'd said. "Let them understand that not everyone who deserves recognition receives it." Ben waited in the parking lot, in the same truck, with new rust spots and old memories. He could have afforded better. Marissa Whitmore's job offer had been genuine, and he'd eventually accepted a position training corporate security teams in situational awareness. The pay was 10 times what he'd made in warehouses, but the truck remained. Some things were beyond upgrading. Through the fence, the same fence where he'd stood, he could see the ceremony. His jacket on the chair looked like a battle standard, a declaration that love sometimes wore camouflage instead of silk. Parents who'd whispered about it last year now explained its significance to others, the story growing with each telling, becoming mythology built on truth. The valedictorian this year was Sarah Chen, daughter of immigrants who worked multiple jobs to afford Whitmore's tuition. Her speech referenced Tyler's from the previous year, talking about visible and invisible sacrifice. She pointed to the empty chair and said, "That jacket represents every parent who ever felt unworthy of these surroundings. But worth isn't measured in thread count or bank accounts. It's measured in presence, in persistence, in the quiet determination to give your children better than you had." When the seal's cloth was mentioned, still displayed in the trophy case, a respectful silence fell. It had become a pilgrimage site of sorts, students touching the case before big tests, drawing courage from the knowledge that someone had faced worse odds and survived. Jake and the team hadn't returned, but they'd sent something, a plaque installed beside the trophy case. It read, "For those who stand watch in shadows so others can stand in light. For those who choose love over glory. For those who measure victory in the success of those they serve. Benjamin Walker, commander, father, hero." Marissa Whitmore had changed, perhaps most of all. Her company now prioritized veteran hiring, and she'd established a daycare for employees' children, having realized that supporting parents meant supporting their entire lives, not just their working hours. She'd also, quietly, begun visiting her brother Daniel more frequently, learning that strength sometimes meant admitting weakness, that control sometimes meant letting go. At this year's ceremony, she announced an expansion of the scholarship program, the Benjamin Walker tradition, she called it. Not just financial support, but mentorship, connection, community, because no one should stand at fences alone. The ceremony proceeded with its usual precision until something unexpected happened. A small girl, perhaps 8 years old, broke free from her mother and ran to the empty chair. Before anyone could stop her, she'd climbed into it, the green jacket enormous around her small shoulders. Her mother, horrified, started forward, but Principal Wilcox raised a hand. "Let her stay," she said into the microphone. "That chair exists for those who need to know they belong." The girl sat through 3 more speeches, the jacket like a protective shell, her eyes wide with wonder at the proceedings. When her sister's name was called to receive a diploma, the little girl stood and clapped with enthusiasm that shook the jacket's metals. Later, when her mother tried to apologize, Principal Wilcox shared her own story. "My father worked 3 jobs to put me through school. He never owned a suit, never felt comfortable at school events, usually waited in the car. I spent so many years ashamed of him, then so many more ashamed of my shame. That little girl sitting in that jacket, unashamed and proud, that's the healing we needed." After the ceremony, Tyler retrieved his father's jacket, holding it like something sacred. He found Ben still in the truck, reading a book, patient as always. "How was it?" Ben asked. "Different. The empty chair changes things, makes people think about who's missing and why." "Good. Institutions need reminders that they serve people, not the other way around." They sat quietly, watching families stream past. Some recognized Ben, waved or nodded, but respected his desire for distance. He'd become something between myth and man, a story told to remind people that heroism had many faces. "Dad," Tyler said eventually. "The jacket. I think we should frame it. Preserve it." Ben shook his head. "It's not a museum piece. It's meant to be worn, to work, to weather. When it falls apart, it falls apart. That's the point. It was never about the jacket. It was about what wearing it meant. Which was? Showing up. Despite everything, because of everything, showing up." As they drove away, Tyler noticed something in the rearview mirror. A man in a worn suit, standing by the fence, watching the dispersing crowd. His daughter had just graduated, but he'd been too ashamed of his appearance to sit with the other parents. Tyler thought of the empty chair, of his father's jacket, of all the margins where love stood watching. "Next year," Tyler said, "we make sure no one stands at the fence unless they choose to." Ben nodded, understanding. The work wasn't done. It might never be done, but that was okay. Some missions didn't end with extraction or victory. Some missions continued as long as there were people who needed to know they belonged. That night, at their small apartment, Ben pulled out a box Tyler had never seen. Inside were his medals, his trident, documents marked with levels of classification that wouldn't be lifted for decades. Also inside was something unexpected, a second green jacket, identical to the first but unworn. "SEALs never go in with just one way out," Ben explained with a rare smile. "Always have backup." Tyler laughed, the sound filling their modest space with warmth. "So the jacket at graduation was always meant to be left behind. Markers need to be placed, paths need to be marked. That chair needed something to hold its purpose." They talked late into the night, father and son, about the past that had shaped them and the future they were shaping, about sacrifice that looked like loss but felt like investment, about love that didn't announce itself but moved mountains in silence. A month later, Tyler received a package at MIT. Inside was a photo from the recent graduation, the little girl in the enormous jacket, smiling with unrestrained joy. The accompanying note was from her mother. "My daughter wants to be a Navy SEAL now. I told her she could be anything." She said, "Even a hero like the jacket man?" I said, "Yes. Thank your father for leaving his jacket behind. It caught someone who was falling." Tyler framed the photo and hung it in his dorm room. When classmates asked about it, he told them about his father, about sacrifice, about standing at fences and sitting in empty chairs. The story spread through MIT's veteran community, then beyond. Requests came for Ben to speak, to share his story officially. He declined them all. "The story tells itself," he said. "I don't need to be there for it." But he did accept one invitation. Walt Greer, the Vietnam veteran who'd recognized him, organized a gathering of local veterans. Not a formal event, just warriors sharing coffee in silence and understanding. Ben arrived in his second jacket, which drew knowing smiles. "Always have backup," Walt said, pouring coffee that could strip paint. "Always," Ben agreed. They didn't talk about operations or medals or glory. They talked about their children, their struggles with civilian life, the way war never really left you, but sometimes, if you were lucky, it taught you what was worth fighting for. "Your boy's speech," one veteran said. "My daughter saw it online. Made her understand why I am the way I am. Thank you for that." "Thank Tyler. He's the one who stood up. He stood because you showed him how." The conversation moved on, but the truth lingered. Every person in that room had stood at some fence, had been asked to move, had sacrificed visibility for someone else's success. Ben's story had given their stories a voice. As the first anniversary of the famous graduation approached, Whitmore Academy received requests from other schools. They wanted to implement their own empty chair traditions, their own recognition of invisible sacrifice. Principal Wilcox created a guide, sharing not just the logistics, but the philosophy. The chair wasn't about veterans specifically. It was about anyone who stood in shadows so others could stand in light. The movement spread quietly, like Ben preferred. No fanfare, no ceremonies, just chairs appearing in graduations across the country. Each one draped with something significant: a nurse's scrubs, a janitor's uniform, a single parent's work badge. Recognition for those who thought recognition wasn't for them. Tyler, finishing his freshman year with honors, returned for the anniversary graduation. This time, Ben agreed to attend properly, sitting in the offered seat in the second row. The front row remained his by right, but he'd asked for the second, comfort in slight distance. When the principal mentioned the tradition's first year, the crowd applauded. When she mentioned Benjamin Walker by name, asking him to stand, he remained seated until Tyler reached over and pulled him up. The ovation was immediate and sustained, but Ben's eyes were on the empty chair, on his first jacket still standing watch. After the ceremony, a young man approached, maybe 17, wearing clothes that had seen better decades. "Mr. Walker? I'm starting college next year, first in my family. My dad, he works construction, doesn't think he belongs at these things. How do I make him understand?" Ben considered the question, then said, "You don't make him understand. You show him. Every success you have, make sure he knows it's his. Every achievement you earn, put his name on it first. Eventually, he'll understand that belonging isn't about meeting someone else's standards. It's about someone saying you belong to them." The young man nodded, absorbed this, then asked, "Does it work? Showing them?" Ben looked at Tyler, who was talking with Principal Wilcox about expanding the scholarship program. Tyler, who'd stood at a podium and changed everything with truth. Tyler, who'd made a jacket mean more than fabric and thread. "Yes," Ben said simply. "It works." As they prepared to leave, Ben did something unexpected. He walked to the empty chair, removed the jacket he was wearing the back up, and exchanged it with the one that had stood guard for a year. The first jacket, weathered by seasons and touched by hundreds of hands seeking its story, came home. The second jacket took its place, ready for its own journey. "Why?" Tyler asked. "Because things that matter don't stay preserved," Ben answered. "They get used. They get worn. They tell stories through their scars." That evening, in their apartment that felt larger now somehow, Ben and Tyler sat with the jacket between them. Each medal, each patch, each tear had a story. But the newest stories were the ones that mattered most. The girl who'd worn it during graduation, the parents who'd touched it for courage, the students who'd learned that heroes didn't always wear capes or even uniforms. Sometimes they just wore love, persistently, regardless of weather. "What happens when it finally falls apart?" Tyler asked. "Then it's done its job. Everything ends, Tyler. The mission, the service, even the memory eventually. But what matters is what grows from what was planted." Tyler understood. The jacket wasn't the point. The scholarship wasn't the point. Even the empty chair wasn't the point. The point was the shift in perspective, the realization that value existed in places people hadn't thought to look. A week later, Ben received a letter. The return address was the Department of the Navy, official and imposing. Inside, an invitation to a ceremony where he'd receive a belated Navy Cross for actions in Afghanistan. The letter explained that classified operations had been reviewed, and his heroism could finally be recognized publicly. Ben read it twice, then handed it to Tyler. "What do you think?" "I think you've earned it. I think you should go." Ben nodded slowly. "I'll go, but I want to wear the jacket. Not the dress uniform they'll expect, the jacket." Tyler smiled. "They won't understand." "No," Ben agreed. "But you will, and that's enough." The ceremony would come later, another story for another time. For now, father and son sat in comfortable silence, the jacket between them like a bridge between past and future. Outside, the world continued its relentless pace, but inside their small apartment, time had a different quality. It moved like love slowly, surely, with purpose beyond measurement. The legacy of that first graduation continued to ripple outward. Schools adopted empty chair policies. Companies created positions specifically for veterans transitioning to civilian life. Communities began recognizing their invisible heroes, the night shift workers, the single parents, the quiet guardians who stood watch without recognition. But for Ben and Tyler Walker, the grand changes mattered less than the small ones. The way they could now walk together without Ben falling back. The way Tyler no longer had to explain his father's appearance. The way love had been given its proper name and place. As graduation season ended and summer began, Ben started a new tradition. Every Sunday, he'd visit the school, sit in the empty chair for an hour, and wait. Sometimes no one came. Sometimes parents who felt out of place would approach, would sit beside him, would share their stories of sacrifice and uncertainty. He'd listen, offer what comfort he could, and always end with the same words. "You belong here. Your love earned you a seat at any table." Principal Wilcox, observing from her office, saw the healing happening in real time. The fence where Ben had stood had been transformed into a memorial garden, with a plaque reading, "For all who stand at edges so others can stand at center." But the real memorial was Ben himself, choosing to return to a place that had once rejected him, transforming it through presence and persistence. One particularly hot Sunday, a woman approached with 3 children. Her uniform medical scrubs beneath a thin coat told a story of double shifts and difficult choices. "Are you him?" she asked. "The jacket father?" Ben nodded, and she sat heavily beside him, exhaustion in every line. "I almost didn't come to my daughter's graduation last month. Felt like I didn't belong, couldn't donate like other parents, couldn't volunteer for committees, but then I heard about you, about the chair, and I came. Sat right here, actually. My daughter saw me, and the look on her face. She stopped, overwhelmed. You showed up, Ben said. That's what matters. In scrubs. At a fancy private school graduation. In scrubs. In love, Ben corrected. Everything else is just details. She smiled through tears, gathered her children, and left with shoulders slightly straighter. Ben remained, knowing others would come. They always did, drawn by the promise that someone would understand, someone would say their sacrifice was seen. Tyler often joined him on these Sundays, bringing coffee and companionship. They'd sit together, father and son, watching the school that had become something more than an institution. It had become a symbol of transformation, of how one moment of truth could change everything. Do you regret the years of silence? Tyler once asked. All those times you could have told people who you were? No, Ben answered immediately. Because then it would have been about who I was. This way, it's about who you are, who we are together. That's the better story. As the year turned and another graduation season approached, the empty chair tradition had spread to hundreds of schools. But at Whitmore Academy, it remained unique. Because here, sometimes, if people looked at the right time, they might see a man in a green jacket sitting in that chair, keeping watch, standing guard over the idea that love needed no invitation, that sacrifice required no recognition, that showing up was sometimes the greatest act of heroism possible. The jacket, both of them, continued their work. One standing guard at ceremonies, the other worn on Sundays and special occasions. They deteriorated slowly, threads loosening, colors fading further. But like all things that matter, they became more beautiful in their decay, more meaningful in their imperfection. Ben Walker had given up command of the nation's most elite warriors to command a household of 2. He'd traded classified missions for homework assistance, combat deployments for parent-teacher conferences, medals for moments. And in the end, sitting in an empty chair at a school that had once asked him to stand by the fence, he knew with absolute certainty that he'd won the only war that mattered, the war to raise a good man, to leave the world better than he'd found it, to prove that love was the most powerful force in any arsenal. The story spread, as true stories do, not through marketing or media, but through whispers and wondering. Parents told children, teachers told students, veterans told civilians. And always, at the center, was the image of a man in a faded green jacket, standing at a fence, watching his son with eyes that held no resentment, only love. Some stories end with explosions, with victories, with flags raised and enemies defeated. This one ended with a father and son, sitting under an oak tree at a school that had learned to see beyond its surfaces, sharing silence that said everything words couldn't. It ended with understanding that heroism had many faces, that sacrifice took many forms, that sometimes the greatest courage was simply showing up, standing watch, bearing witness to someone else's moment in the light. The jacket would eventually fall apart completely. The tradition would evolve beyond recognition. The names would fade from memory. But the truth they represented, that love reorganizes the universe around itself, that sacrifice is investment, that dignity enters quietly, would continue, in empty chairs and full hearts, in shadows that guard light, in fathers who stand at fences and sons who refuse to let them stand alone. This is how honor propagates itself, not through force or declaration, but through the quiet transmission of values from one generation to the next. Through jackets worn thin by time but thick with meaning, through empty chairs that hold the weight of invisible sacrifice, through men like Benjamin Walker, who understood that the greatest missions don't end with extraction or medals, but with children who grow up knowing they were chosen, they were worth everything, they were loved beyond measure or reason. And in the end, that's all that mattered. That Tyler Walker stood at podiums because Benjamin Walker had stood at fences. That love had won its quiet war. That somewhere, always, someone was standing watch so someone else could stand tall. The green jacket hung in their apartment now, both versions side by side, not as relics but as reminders. Every morning, Tyler saw them before heading to MIT. Every evening, Ben saw them before beginning his security rounds. They spoke without words, these jackets, saying what both men knew. That service never really ended, it just changed uniforms. From military green to the invisible cloth of fatherhood, from classified operations to the daily mission of showing up. And so the story continues, not in these words but in every parent who stands at every fence, in every child who recognizes that sacrifice, in every institution that learns to see beyond its assumptions. It continues in empty chairs and full hearts, in worn jackets and earned pride, in the space between what we show the world and what we are when no one's watching. Benjamin Walker had been trained to leave no trace, to move through darkness unseen. But love had left traces everywhere, in a scholarship fund, in an empty chair tradition, in a son who understood that greatness wasn't about being seen but about making sure others were. The mission, the only one that had ever really mattered, was complete. But its echoes would continue long after the last thread of the green jacket had turned to dust, carried forward by everyone who'd learned that sometimes the most profound honor comes from standing at the edges, bearing witness, choosing love over glory, presence over recognition. The jacket had done its duty. The father had done his. The son would do his in turn. And somewhere, in schools and homes across the country, other parents in other worn jackets would stand at other fences, knowing now that they belonged there just as much as anyone. Because love had earned them that place. Love always had. It just took one moment of truth, one voice raised in recognition, one empty chair, to make everyone see it. This is the power of a single story told truthfully. It reveals all the other stories that were always there, waiting in shadows, standing at fences, loving without announcement. Benjamin Walker's story was exceptional, but it was also universal. Every parent who'd ever sacrificed for a child, every person who'd ever chosen love over advancement, every individual who'd stood at margins so others could stand at centers, they all wore versions of that green jacket. They all deserved their own empty chairs. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Not the medals Ben had earned in combat, not the grades Tyler had earned in school, but the recognition that heroism existed in ordinary acts of extraordinary love. That dignity didn't require designer clothes. That worth couldn't be measured in donation dollars. That sometimes, the most important person at any ceremony was the one standing by the fence, watching with quiet pride, wearing a jacket that had seen better days but had never seen better purpose.